have your mobile phones, can you please switch them off or put them on silent to minimise noise? Can you all hear me clearly enough? Yes? Okay, thank you. There are copies of tonight's agenda circulated on the seats. If there's not enough, could you please share? You can leave at leisure, but if you are leaving after your item's been heard or considered, can you do so quietly, please? And also silence when there's debate between councillors as well. We have allocated times for objectors and applicants' representatives to speak and present tonight. Those who have listed will be announced by Darren Rudd, our officer here. So once again, there's no dialogue between the gallery and councillors once the meeting has commenced. Having said that, I now will open tonight's meeting with the membership as listed. We've all had copies of the agenda since last week. Councillors, are there any apologies this evening? We have one apology from Councillor Valella, who won't be attending. I've got two other councillors who... Councillor Williams is running late, although she will be attending tonight, and Councillor Cetus is in the building somewhere and he will be joining us during the course of the meeting. Item 3 for consideration, disclosures of conflicts of interest. Any conflicts of interest from councillors?
I know, Mr Mayor.
None, then we'll move on. We have item 4 for consideration, confirmation of minutes of the previous planning committee.
I'll move that.
Move Councillor Gregor, second Councillor Lee. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That item is carried. We now go to consideration reports. What will happen now, members of the gallery, is officer will present each item in its numerical order. If there are speakers to the item, there will be objectors and applicants who have been listed to speak. Mr Rudd will announce that particular person, and councillors will ask questions of the officer before debating and deciding on the outcome of that matter. We'll now go on to consideration reports. Item 5.1, application for planning permit for 2 to 6 McCutcheon Street, Northcote. Over to you, Darren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This application seeks approval for a four-storey residential development, which includes 29 dwellings and 29 car spaces. There is a waiver of the visitor parking sought as part of the application. Within the 29 dwellings, there are 22 of them that are two-bedroom and 7 single-bedroom dwellings. The car parking is provided in the basement floor and is accessed via the private way. As set out in the officer's report, the subject lands are made with the meeting precinct. This is all detailed in the structure plans on the officer report. The preferred item in the change area in this precinct is 3 to 4 stories. The application has been advertised. There have been 39 objections received. The grounds of objection and the officer's response to the concerns raised are all detailed on pages 10 through to 17. The assessment of this application is that it is recommended to the report. The site is consistent with the Northcote structure plan, with the built form being suitably recessed from the residential properties, which are low scale to use the subject plan.
Thank you, Darren. Now, do you have any presenters this evening for this item?
Yes, Mr Mayor. There's no applicant that is registered this evening. I have 3 objectors listed to speak. They are as follows: Travis Holt on behalf of Tony Edwards, David Hingston and Joanne Nicolau.
Okay, of the 3 speakers, you have a total of 5 minutes combined. So, is Travis here? David as well? David, yes. And Joanna, yes? No? No, okay. So, Travis and David, if one of you can take your seat at the front, you've got 2.5 minutes each, okay? Yeah, come to the front here, please, sir, yeah, to the front table, take a seat, and we'll have you... You can sit there, yeah, sure. Okay, guys, yeah, 2.5 minutes each. Your time starts on the clock. On the screen here. Okay, fire away.
We have a few quick questions. One with the
not questions, they're summaries.
Acknowledgement of the overshadowing of the Ross Parade. We know that there's going to be an extension of the screens, hiring up of the balconies. We would like to make sure that these balconies don't extend the overshadowing, and if they do, we'd like them to be pushed back further to make sure the overshadowing new calculation isn't affecting us even more. We know that the screening is going to be affected. We would appreciate a dilamination survey after having heritage listed areas surrounding the building, having massive cracks with a mass construction with the mass bulking, overshadowing. There's no transition from 5 to 1 story. There's over coverage of 65% and other such things. What we would prefer is to have a transition from 5 stories on High Street to 4 stories, and then halfway through the property down to 3 stories, down to 1 story. The 1 story to 4 story transition we feel is unreasonable, and to have a 4 story next to a 1 story residential property is something that we would definitely use. That transition is within reason and will stop you of parking issues, not having any visible parking, and it will change the actual height of the building, which is then surpassed what the regulations of the council actually have. So with the extension of all the other problems, we feel like that would be a good compromise, saying that we've rectified all the other rules. I'm going to cut it off, I don't know if you've got to pick this paper.
Okay. All right. Well, you've got the balance of the 5 minutes remaining, sir.
Mr Mayor, Councillors, the officer's report relating to this development downplays 2 aspects where the proposed plans do not conform to the required standard, and which seriously impact on the quality of life of current ratepayers living in east-facing units of Elizabeth Towers, which is the adjacent building on that side. One of the problems relates to the proposed building's height, as Colin mentioned, of 13.8 metres, which on page 20 it stated exceeds that required by the standard. The other is to do with side and rear setbacks. On page 24 it states that the western boundary setbacks do not comply. The result is that east-facing units in the adjacent Elizabeth Towers building will lose their only natural sunlight, but that's morning sunlight, that's the only sunlight they get. They won't just have visual bulk of the new building closer than that allowed by the standard, they also won't get any sun in their units. This is illustrated on page 13 of the 501 attachment related to shadowing, where you've got various shadows detailed for the 22nd of September. This building's planned lack of compliance with council requirements will seriously diminish the quality of life for existing Darebin council ratepayers. And we simply just asked, or I'd ask that these concerns be considered. It's obviously standards are there to ensure that these sorts of matters aren't overlooked. I'd ask you to consider those matters seriously, please.
Okay, that's it?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. If you can resume your seat in the gallery, please. Okay, over to councillors. Any questions from councillors? Councillor McCarthy.
My first question is probably more a process one, just to get an idea of where we are in the time frame. How many days are we into this application?
Mr Mayor, well over 60 days.
Well over 60 days, is that correct? Yep. And is there any explanation as to why the applicant hasn't presented this evening on what would be considered a significant building?
Can't answer that. Can't answer that question.
Okay. I've got other questions, but I'll give other councillors a chance.
Questions from councillors? Councillor Lee.
Yes, just a question, Mr Mayor. So the application indicated a 13.8 metre height in that, and is under general residential zone 2. What is the preferred or indicative height of general residential zone 2?
Mr Mayor, just to explain the situation, the council has undertaken an extensive consultation process in the structure plan back in 2007, and the way the planning schemes are set up in Victoria is that where you go through that sort of process of the structure planning and you start to determine heights, that's your first go-to point when you're looking at whether the height is appropriate or appropriate. In this case, what has happened in the structure planning, the decision's landed on a height in terms of 3 to 4 stories. And as set out in the report, that's the main consideration. So that is primary consideration over what is specified in the general residential zone. But there is noted that if you do a technical assessment in clause 55, you would see that 3-story portion in the structure planning 4 stories with the same zone.
Councillor Seedis.
Just to clarify that point that Mr Rudd made, so McCutcheon Street was a precinct within the North Construction Plan?
Yes, Mr Mayor.
Yeah.
It's a precinct nominated for the meeting, and if you
Councillor Greco.
Yeah, look, I just want to, based on one of the comments made by one of the objectors, the transition, the possible transition from a 5 down to a 3, if that was to be entertained or at least tried to be achieved, I would assume that that would require a complete sort of rewrite of the planning application. Would that be so?
Mr. Mayor, the assessment report, as I said in my closing comments, is that there's actually a really fine grain to the allotments in McCutcheon Street. A lot of the frontages are less than 10 metres. If you have a look at the plan and you go up floor by floor, you notice that when you get to the top floor, the setback is actually 7 metres. That exceeds the West Code requirements. And so virtually over one of those fine grain lots, you've got that transition happening to the east. That is something in negotiations that was to ensure that that top floor was set back as far as possible. We've then got a further step back to half a lot wide to the 3rd floor, and then the 1st and 2nd floor are relatively close to the adjoining residential. So there is a step up. It's probably not the extent that was raised in the submission being sought by our residents. But again, these areas are all included in the medium change, so that there's an expectation that there could be further transition in the future.
Okay, Councillor McCarthy.
Just following on from Councillor Greco's point, if we could just get a response to the other issues and questions raised by the objectors just in their presentation then as well. I'm not sure if Mr Rudd got a chance to note down the other issues of concern that were raised, but there was a couple there. There was one that I made a note of. Yep.
Mr Mayor, these are also addressed in pages 10 to 17, extensive the objections. But just to summarise, overshadowing, there is compliance, and overshadowing is explained in it, but and addressed equally by Condition 1M. So the reason Condition 1M is there is to address concerns raised by objectors in relation to overshadowing, and ensures that the application is, if supported on that basis, will comply with the planning scheme. Construction damage was raised. Council, if it wanted to tonight, cannot consider construction damage. That is something that is left through the civil proceeding and through the construction stage. So that's something that's assessed automatically by the heights. We've canvassed that. It's again, as the report before you says, this is a structure plan that is designated this area that's where the stories. That exceeds the 9 metres that you this code so that's why there's a non-compliance, and that's justified because the application is following the strategic direction adopted by council and review of the planning scheme. The lack of transition, I think that the officers in the report are contending that there is a reasonable transition. There is respect back to the lifestyle residential as far as the strategy for this area goes in terms of the medium change for full-story homes.
Okay, councillors.
The impact
Still going.
on Elizabeth Towers is also explained. That property sits in a commercial zone. This property sits in a residential zone. Yes, there are matters of overlooking that are still relevant, but the degree to which council can protect the amenity of the properties is limited by the planning scheme and review the social and by retail. It's also so council on the site can't protect views, can't protect sunlight to the degree that it could if it was a property from the sale.
Can I just thank you to Mr Rudd for that? I would just ask though, under the provisions of the Northcote Structure Plan, and I just want to get clarity on this, if I may, through you, Mr Chair. Page 17, the reference to built form clearly says that as per the Northcote Structure Plan, we would allow higher buildings of 3 to 4 stories where off-site amenity impacts can be minimised. I think this is where the point of contention is here about whether the off-site amenity impacts have been minimised in this regard in the imposition of a 4-storey form rather than a 3-storey form. So I would, unless there's any questions, foreshadow a motion of refusal.
Okay, if there's no further questions, we have a recommendation there or an alternative.
So I've got an alternative which I'd like to move. The alternative is that the application be refused on the following grounds of non-compliance. Clause 55.03-2 B7 building height, Clause 55-03-3 B8 site coverage, 55-04-1 B17 side and rear setbacks, 55-04-2 B18 walls on boundaries, 55-04-6 B22 overlooking, 55-04-7 internal views, 55-05-3 daylight to new windows, 55-05-5 solar access to open space.
Seconder. Councillor Walsh has seconded. Wish to speak. Any further to it, Councillor?
Whilst I appreciate the comments by Mr Rudd and obviously that there are some merits to this application, I also would question the assumption that it has minimised the impacts to adjoining properties. I note that this is a site within the Northcote Structure Plan. However, I don't necessarily agree that that is a given, that a 4-storey form automatically should be approved, and I'd like to see something that has greater compliance, obviously not just with Clause 55, but also with consideration to adjoining properties. The Northcote Structure Plan does precede the stronger planning controls that we are now looking to try to have adopted in St George's Road and Plenty Road. However, I think that if we are to be true to the quality of development that we're seeking to achieve, on that basis we'd see a development that there is more in keeping with that transition that has been expected from objectors. So on that basis I would put forward the refusal.
Not necessary. Councillor Walsh, anything to add as seconder?
Yeah, look, I'm going to, I'll just keep it brief, but I'm going to second it because I also don't think that this site is quite, or this application is quite right, as it were, and you know, and would also be concerned about the impacts to neighbouring properties, and given also it's, you know, on a you know, it's not on a main road, and so therefore I've got and thus have concerns about the as does Councillor McCarthy have concerns about the impact on other residents.
There's no further debate. Councillor Seedis?
I'd like to speak in opposition.
Councillor Seedis, you can speak against.
I think for the very attention that Councillor McCarthy has drawn us to, just to remind us, I suppose in terms of the context in which this application has been brought before Council, most councillors here would not have been part of that council in which the Northcote Structure Plan was developed, in which the corresponding streets, including McCutcheon Street, were incorporated within the Northcote Structure Plan. The memory dims in terms of what precinct number is given, but one of the things that I think we've been all pretty conscious about is the default position in relation to Res Code, that anything within 100 metres of a designated area for intensification can, in and of itself, be eligible to put their hand up to put in an application to ape that which we're prepared to countenance on the major thoroughfare, which is High Street. In this instance, that does not apply because the broader reach of that particular precinct incorporating that street. So we don't have what I've termed in the past development creep in this instance. So whether, for instance, the interpretation of this particular application having fidelity with that notion of keeping or in keeping with an intensification in this particular precinct or not is going to be an interesting one, and I like novel challenges, and I think this one obviously is going to go to VCAT, and it'll be interesting on their part to reflect on whether, for instance, that has occurred in this instance. I, for my mind, can't see how this doesn't, translate accordingly. The other issue, of course, is about the setbacks. But for the 3-metre carriageway, the right of way there, you'd have difficulty. But it's got that setback, and I think VCAT will view this application favourably in those circumstances, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Seatis. Any other speakers? Mover can close the debate if he chooses to do so, or we go straight to a vote.
You can, sorry?
Not for an alternate motion, Mr Mayor. Go for it.
Well, you can. It's only to an amendment, so you can't.
Yep,
Look, just very briefly, while I respect Councillor Seatis' differing view and the experience of going through the Northcote structure planning process, I take a pretty hard and mean look at these sorts of things, and I'd like to see something that is far more compliant on a range of fronts. I was prepared to support something that was in that 4-storey capacity at this site if it was of what I would consider an exemplary design that minimised the impacts on neighbouring properties, and that's not what I see here, unfortunately, and therefore on that basis I can't support it for the reasons outlined, but I respect the difference in view.
Okay. Debate is closed, and I'll put that to a vote for an alternative recommendation to refuse the application. All those in favour? Those against? Carried. That application has been refused by council members of the gallery. All parties will be notified of council's decision. All objectors will be notified. The applicant will have 60 days. You're on the division. Let me finish explaining first. All objectors will be notified of council's decision that we have refused that application. The applicant has 60 days appeal right to go to VCAT to challenge council's decision. Okay, Councillor Walsh, do you want a division?
Yes, please.
All those in favour of the refusal, please stand up. I name Councillor Lee, Councillor McCarthy, Montana, Walsh and Greco. Those against, I name Councillor Lawrence, Councillor Seatis. Thank you very much. Those who have come for that item can stay, or you may leave quietly, please. We have a very long agenda tonight. We might get stuck right into it. Next item is 5.2. Application for planning permit number 27 Hutton Street, Thornbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This application...
Sorry, Darren. People are leaving quietly, and if we can have silence in the gallery, please, so we can hear the officer.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This application seeks approval to construct 3 double-storey dwellings on a lot. 3 dwellings are made up of a single 3-bedroom dwelling, the remaining 2 are 2-bedrooms. 3 car spaces are proposed, so there is a single waiver of a car space being sought for the 3-bedroom dwelling. The open space for the proposed development for the 3 dwellings is provided a combination of a small ground floor service yard and a first floor balcony. The important thing to note in this application, Mr Mayor, is its context. It's a site that sits immediately behind the old corner shop, which now functions as a cafe. So the development is at the rear of that, and it's typical of what you would have expected in the traditional forms. And there are other examples nearby, Mr Mayor, where sites like this have been redeveloped quite successfully, we would argue. The application has been advertised. There have been 28 objections received. The grounds of objection detailed on page 41 through to 43. There's also a response from the officers on those objections. The report of the Board Committee concludes that the application has a high level of compliance with the planning scheme. Some of the variances are explained or addressed through conditions of approval. Given the site's context, the application is considered an appropriate response for a site like this. The application is therefore recommended for support.
Thank you, Darren. Do we have any speakers for this item?
Mr Mayor, the applicant has registered to speak on time. It's Nick Robbins at Glossop Town Planning. There was an objector that sought to speak, but that occurred this afternoon, Mr Mayor.
Okay, can we have the applicant here, please? Take the front seat at the table, and you've got 5 minutes.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to Council. The applicant agrees with and supports the recommendation of Council's planning department. Council could issue an urgent decision subject to conditions. All of the conditions recommended by Council's planning officers are accepted by the applicant as planning conditions. The application achieves overall compliance with 465 of the Darabin planning scheme. The application also advances the outcomes of the Darabin housing strategy. The introduction of the housing strategy was planned to amend the The proposal has been architecturally designed to respond to the area's character in a positive way. The two-storey dwellings in respect to the area's character, which refers to one of two-storey buildings, the dwellings are modest in size and of a similar scale to nearby dwellings. The dwellings activate affluent streets and contribute positively to perceptions of public safety, surveillance and windows and placement of balconies which overlook the public realm. The site contains no significant vegetation and the landscape plan to be required as a condition. The elevations include a mixture of materials which articulate the form of creation of interest. The design has been sensitively designed to ensure no illegal offsite impacts to neighbouring properties. The site has historically contained walls along the length of the hypermetric space of 29 Hutton Street and 32 Howard Street. The proposal reduces the extent of the wall along these boundaries. This is a sensitive response to the neighbouring properties. The height of the dwellings is 6.39 metres is modest. The setback from neighbouring dwellings exceeds the requirements of 55. The upper level walls are highly articulated with steps for accessions and variations in the detail. The proposal causes minimal overshadow which complies with 55. The dwellings are set back from the habitable room windows of 29 Harding Street, which is a sensitive response. The conditions recommended by the council planning office was appropriately address potential overlooking concerns in the objections. The traffic engineering aspects of the proposal were assessed by council traffic engineers and planning officers as appropriate support them subject to conditions. The surrounding road network will comfortably accommodate the additional traffic generated by 3 dwellings. The site is directly opposite the Thornbury railway station, within walking distance of Thornbury Activity Centre, on High Street and 2 ram routes. Taking into account the availability of sustainable modes of transport to the site, provision of 1 car space for the dwelling is suitable. In conclusion, the applicant respectfully asks the council to help to issue a notice of decision to grant a planning permit consistent with the planning officer's recommendation.
Thank you very much. If you can resume your seat in the gallery. Darren, that's it. Thank you very much. Questions from councillors? Councillor Seeters first.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I know this corner area well, and as dilapidated as it looks, and I'll preface my remarks by saying that,
Question.
and eager, I suppose, for a much more modernised interface with the railway, given how ugly it looks at present. I'd like to ask a question through you, Mr Mayor, to Mr Rudd, the justification for exceeding the site coverage. If I draw councillors' attention to page 45, where we view, ideally, site coverage should not encompass more than 60% of any subject site. Why, at 85%, has it received a recommendation for a grant of permit?
Darren?
Mr Mayor, this is a fairly important issue, and page 45 of the officer's report details this, but also explains the reasons why the visual bulk or the site coverage could be considered acceptable. It bears in mind the context of the site. It's quite close to the Thornbury railway station. It actually has a characteristic from a previous era when it was originally developed, where there was considerable site coverage. There's also a similar configuration further along in Raymond Street on Hutton Street as well, that provides a similar site layout to this, and that's an application that's viewed as being relatively appropriate and responsive to the site and its context. And that's the assessment report here, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lee?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've got a couple of questions. The applicant mentioned that it's in proximity to the Thornbury Activity Centre. Can you just provide some comment about how the Thornbury Activity Centre, where it's located and its designation? Is it a major activity centre or a precinct? What level of activity centre is Thornbury designated as?
Thornbury is identified as a neighbourhood centre. If you're looking at the way it's been looked at in the
Darren. Councillor Lee?
Just a follow-up from that question then. I noticed that all the development fronts up Clapham Street, and yet this has a Clapham Street address. So the question is, at what stage do we justify or approve extensive borrowed amenity from Clapham Street frontage as opposed to Hutton Street address, which this application seeks to approval from?
Mr Mayor, I agree with what the applicant said. If I take it to the state provision for the planning scheme, there's a general planning principle as a step one, and that is where we have areas of public, where there's a strong public such as a street and a railway line, one of the key objectives is to provide passive and active surveillance of those areas. And one of the things the planning scheme actually encourages is developments like this to activate the corner, taking the eyes on the street towards Clapham Avenue and the railway is seen as a good and desirable planning outcome to reduce some of the undesirable elements that are used along the railway corridor. So it's a principle of eyes on the street. It's also more attractive than a high front wall, one would argue, having actual places in the fronts of homes facing on Clapham Avenue.
Thank you, Darren. Councillor Greco?
Yeah, just in relation to page 45 again, I note there that the permeability is just a little bit over 13% when the standard is actually 20%. The report doesn't really go into much detail about what the actual impact of that low permeability will be in regards to drainage and also in regards to the stormwater infiltration.
Mayor, during the building permit stage, council will be involved with hydraulic calculations from the civil engineer, and if there is capacity issues in this area that have not been alerted to us through the planning process, the application is referred to our capital works staff, civil engineers. They've not raised issues during that process, but there will be a detailed examination to ensure the pipes, the discharge, and if there's a requirement for on-site detention, there's some of the strategies that can be deployed to ensure that the load that is project onto our drainage network is not above the pre-existing rates. So that's the basis on which they're assessed, but that comes a little later.
Okay. Councillor McCarthy?
Two quick questions. Where are we in the statutory time frame? And secondly, just can we get confirmation that there were no objectors that wished to speak?
Mr Mayor, there was an objector that sought to speak this afternoon. The deadline was midday on Friday, so it depends on the yes there was. In terms of our timeline, this one's just over 60 days. Our reports from this committee are written 30 days in advance, so it's very difficult for us to achieve that 60-day compliance when that is required to this committee.
Thank you.
This one's just over.
Just to get clarity, the deadline being midday on Friday, when would the objectors have been notified of that requirement to register by?
The letters are also going out much earlier, so they're almost 2 weeks in advance, Mr Mayor.
Okay, if there's no further questions, there's a recommendation there. I'm happy to move this. Move Councillor Seedis, have a seconder.
I'll second.
Second to Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Seedis, you wish to speak?
Mr Mayor, this one is interesting because it poses challenges on a couple of fronts. One which I alluded to courtesy of page 45 in terms of the footprint associated with this development, but also as previously expressed in relation to other applications of similar design in relation to reverse living. I note that all of the proposed developments or units, townhouses, whatever you want to call them in this instance, are reverse living. But the qualification here has to be in relation to the subject site. And here we have a derelict site, make no mistake. It's crying out for a renewal. And of course, no government, whether Commonwealth, state or local, would be able to trespass in order to effect that transformation. So in this instance, we have to rely on private sector development in order to give us at least a chance of modernising what looks like a very ugly interface between it and the railway line. So I'm able to reconcile with myself in relation to its two failings, and I stress that not lightly, in relation to exceeding the footprint, which otherwise would trigger in my mind a straight refusal, and also for the fact that all three developments or proposed townhouses are relying on reverse living configurations, which in of itself is prima facie of the fact that the site is so constrained that otherwise the development could not support the level of intensification as proposed here before us without that configuration. So I'm able to reconcile, as I said, with those two failings. If I can categorise my support for it, it'd be more less complimentary, if I can put it that way. But it's recognition of the fact that these kind of interfaces are typical around the Northcote area, and I'm sure in other parts of the city of Darebin. So on that basis, it's more qualified support because I'd like to see a transformation of these areas, and also because it increases passive surveillance, which of course is not a core planning consideration, but in of itself in terms of trying to encourage, I suppose, new developments in and around our transport hubs, that this is the kind of development that we would like to encourage. And as noted by Mr Rudd, it's not atypical in terms of a constrained block within the near vicinity. So on those grounds, Mr Mayor, I'm happy to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Sears. Councillor Lawrence is second. Anything to add?
No, just briefly, Mr Mayor, I did struggle with this application, and obviously the first site, the number of units and the site coverage was concerned, but given that the development is coming from the side street and the actual constrained side of the block, even if this was done as a dual lock with one building behind it, that limited depth would end up again with a heavy site coverage. So this is not a sort of thing I would like to support in terms of principle of site coverage. I do note that the coffee shop has been rejuvenated at the front, and that stays there. And so while it's constrained, on the sake of adding to housing diversity, I think I can look at it, and the fact that, yeah, even if they built one townhouse there, they'd take up the block too, just because it's too narrow.
Councillor McCarthy.
Look, I'll also support this for similar reasons to Councillor Lawrence. I note the proximity, it's directly opposite Thornbury Station, and we are seeking to see appropriate forms of housing close to train stations. Had this been in a street configuration where it had residential directly opposite from it, the lack of setbacks from the street would have knocked it out for me alone, but we don't have that issue in this case. The two considerations that concerned me, one was the wall-on boundary. It does fit within the existing res code requirements, and we would not have a strong ground at VCAT on that basis. And the second one, of course, was the combined permeability and site coverage, and for the same reasons I think this would get passed through VCAT quite easily because of the proximity to the train station. I think that the conditions that have been imposed by officers are good. There might be others that we might have liked to have seen, but on this basis I think it is supportable because it delivers a type of diversity, and it's appropriate at that site and close to the school. So.
Councillor Lee.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll speak against the application, Mr Mayor. I think the application is somewhat of an overreach. I'm glad the Councillor Seat has picked up the issue of reverse living, and when you combine that with the excessive site coverage, somewhat 25% over the stated standard, and also reduction in permeability within 7% of the standard, I think it does catches your attention. In my opinion, the development is an overdevelopment because it seeks to maximise the the borrowed amenity from Clapham Street, notwithstanding the fact that we do need that degree of passive surveillance, as Mr Rudd has said earlier. So essentially what this development seeks to do is to maximise the yield and coverage on the site at the expense of the amenity impact, not only within the residences themselves, but also the surrounding neighbourhood. What I do also find interesting is that this reverse living situation is somewhat justified with the extent of public access to transport only, and it's not justified where there is no major activity centre nearby, and it's gaming on the fact that Thornbury Village might pick up somewhere along the track. I'm sure it will, but in its present form, it seeks to do too much on the ground that's too constrained, and on that ground I'm not prepared to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. If the mover chooses to close the debate or straight to a vote, I'll put that straight to a vote to support the officer's recommendation. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Council has decided to issue a notice of decision, a temporary permit in relation to that application. All objectors will be notified of Council's decision and have 21 days of appeal should they choose to go to VCAT. All parties will be notified of Council's decision tonight. So technically a notice of this decision is a permit, okay, with appeal rights to go to VCAT. Thank you very much. Those who come for that item can leave or stay for the duration of the meeting. Next item for consideration is 5.3, application planning permit 9 Smith Street, Thornbury. Darren, over to you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This application seeks approval to construct 6 double-storey dwellings on a lot. This includes 4 two-bedroom dwellings and 2 three-bedroom dwellings. There are a total of 6 car spaces that are proposed, therefore a waiver of 3 spaces is sought. 2 of those for the three-bedroom dwellings, 1 each, and a single car space. Open space for the dwellings is proposed in a combination of ground floor open space, balconies and roof terraces. And these are all detailed in full on page 71 of the officer's report. This site is also well located to public transport and the Thornbury Village, not far from High Street. The site is included in the general residential zone. The site has an area of 825 square metres, so it's quite large in relative terms of Thornbury. The application has been advertised. There have been 6 objections received. The grounds for objection and an officer's response to those is detailed on pages 62 to 64. The application is recommended for support, subject to conditions which are detailed in the application. And it's noted, Mr Mayor, that there are a number of minor areas, and what the officer report says is even though there are a number of conditions, in themselves they're not sufficient enough to persuade or for the officers to put forward a recommendation for refusal. All of them are relatively minor plan changes that can be considered. And I think there's a good explanation through the report on the reasons for those conditions that were applied.
Thank you, Darren. Do we have anyone speaking for this item tonight?
Mr Mayor, just the applicant this evening, Chris McKenzie.
Thank you, Chris. Please take the chair at the front. You have 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much. In the previous application, Mr Rudd explained or mentioned to you the revival of Thornbury Village, and it's certainly something that's quite close to this application and close to the people associated with it as well. You may or may not know that I have my office in High Street, Thornbury. The architect for this project, Shahid Khairul, is in High Street, Thornbury, and also our clients, the Loves of Love Real Estate, have their office in High Street, Thornbury. Between the 3 of us, we're all about 50 people who all find it very good to work in High Street, Thornbury, and we're all very aware that there are a lot of people who find it very convenient and very desirable to live in and around High Street, Thornbury. And your planning scheme does acknowledge this as well. This site is between High Street and St George's Road. It's just east of the train line, a couple of houses east of the train line. So it's 100 metres back to High Street. It's less than 500 to get all the way across to St George's Road where you pick up the number 11 train. And it's about 200 or 250 metres from the station straight up the train line, on the street that is straight up the train line. And your zoning agreement really is the preferred zoning for townhouse development that picks up and responds to res code without the variations that you're applying in the more remote areas. Smith Street itself is quite a mixed character. It has a long history of flat developments dating back to the 60s and 70s. We have flats directly opposite us, we have flats directly to one side of us and directly behind us, and our other side now that is a dual occupancy with 2 stories in the rear yard. So we have a 2-storey form all around us on all sides, and that is consistent with the mixed nature of this area. It's consistent also with that reality. And it's close to so many things that not just the plan scheme, but the community generally has recognised for a long time that it's a very convenient place to live, and a diverse range of housing and households enjoy living in this area. And my clients being in the real estate industry are very well aware that there are people who are looking for high quality townhouse living within walking distance of all the things that Killarney has to offer. And this is what this proposal is trying to do. We have 6 dwellings around a central driveway. 4 of the dwellings are reverse living designs, and the 2 of the rear have gardens along the side boundaries. They also have a roof terrace. And you recall I said behind us is a 2-storey flat building with a sea of parking around it. So it's, whilst it's a residential interface, it's not anywhere near as sensitive as a backyard residential interface that you may have in some other settings. Council may or may not be aware, this application was initially assessed, or the core assessment was undertaken by Denise Yannakoramatsu, and in our experience is very thorough. It sends things up through the administrative process with your officers, she's very satisfied that all of the details have been addressed. This is the second similar type of application that Denise has managed recently in this area. She managed an application at Valentine Street. It was supported by her after a lot of work to make sure it was right. Ultimately, it was refused in this chamber, but a few weeks ago it was approved by VCAT. One of the things VCAT particularly noted is that this area between High Street and St George's Road with this zoning and with no overlay is an area where reverse living is very well suited, because it does provide that diversity in an area that is so close to all of the facilities where you might otherwise also encourage apartment living, which obviously would rely only on housing. So the concept of this, with the mix of reverse and courtyard, is consistent with how VCAT has seen this area already. On detail, there are only 2 real issues that I want to take you to. The first is, before coming up to the meeting tonight, in March, when the application had been assessed, there were some final requests by the planner to make further adjustments on the side where we had the dual occupancy to ensure the shadowing assessment was acceptable to the planner.
10 seconds.
Further changes were made. The last thing is parking. We're seeking waivers for our 3-bedders. 39% of 3-bedroom homes.
That's time, Chris. That's time.
It's appropriate. It's supported by your planning scheme.
Okay, thank you for that. If you can resume your seat in the gallery. Questions from councillors to the officers? There are no questions. We have a recommendation.
I'm happy to move recommendation.
Councillor Lawrence has moved the recommendation. Have we got a seconder?
I'll second.
Councillor Lee has seconded. Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Mr Mayor, this block, as it's been stated, is 825 square metres, which is the size of a reservoir block, and so obviously it's like a double block in Thornbury. But this site is also suited for development, given that it is right in the middle, the train line and the tram line here. And I would note Thornbury Village is going through a revival, but anyway, all of Thornbury is going through a revival on the High Street. So it's well suited, and given the site context, it's suited for this type of development. And in terms of car waiver, there's a lot of debate about this, and obviously there's City of Melbourne and City of Moreland okaying applications with no car parking, but this probably is a zone where you've got saturation of public transport. You've also got a bus network to Essendon and Ivanhoe, just near here as well. So this might be one place where I would support car waiver.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Lee, anything to add?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. It's quite a contrast to the previous application. I note the generous land size, as Councillor Lawrence has mentioned, and it also seeks to still preserve, to an extent, the garden character of the area by providing front garden and front yard amenities to the residents. While I have some reservations about reverse living, it is in the context of not all reverse living, that portion thereof. So it is justifiable in that context. It doesn't seek to overreach and cram in as much as we can, and on that basis I'm prepared to accept it.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. There is no... Councillor Cetus?
Yeah, just to pick up on that,
Speaking for?
and probably would be better if, rather than us trying to find the site coverage in future, perhaps in terms of tables that we normally see, Mr Mayor, in this instance, ranging from page 73 onwards, we actually have a dedicated line in terms of its site coverage. It might help.
Officers have noted that.
Yep, rather than trying to find it.
Thank you, Councillor Cetus.
In this instance, in reflecting on the previous one, again, notwithstanding the advice given by Mr Rudd, or I should say Mr McKenzie, it is a horses for courses exercise, right? And I've made this point before. So the position of the council or the planning committee in this instance is not one of a doctrinaire blanket objection to reverse living, but it has to have regard to its site context. It has to have regard to the proportionality of the amount of mix associated with the development. In this instance, you might argue that perhaps 2 out of is slightly low, and I hear that. Given where it's located and its relative proximity, both in terms of the railway line and, as Councillor Lawrence mentioned, in terms of its abundance of public transport modes, and also Thornbury Village, you can't fault it. But it shouldn't be given that, particularly when you reflect on our previous attitudes in relation to applications in reservoir, where there have been significant distances associated with similar proposals which we've taken a stance to say no. So, again, I'm hoping that VCAT has actually recognised the position that we've taken.
15 seconds.
But it's not just a blanket position, but one that actually directly reflects on the site in question. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. And site coverage is 58.34%, well below the standard. So,
upper.
Any further debate? If not, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour of the recommendation? Those against? That's carried. Council has decided to issue a notice of decision for that item. Technically, a permit has been granted for the applicant. All parties will be notified of council decision. Objectors will be also notified and given 21 days of appeal should they choose to go to VCAT on this matter. If they do go, council will obviously go and defend whatever decision has been voted on by the committee. Next item of consideration is 5.4, applications for amending planning permit and ending S173 agreement for 1 to 999 Helen Street, Northcote. Over to the officers.
Mr Mayor, I know there are no speakers at this item, so I'm happy to present the report. If there are otherwise on your hands, I can provide a third-party. It is a little different. There are 2 applications before you. An amendment to a planning permit and a proposal to end for section 173.
Questions? Councillor Cetus.
I note Mr Rudd laughing. Where do you start?
I think we know what it's going to be. Questions, please, Councillor.
Where do I start with this application?
Questions.
I mean, this offends on many various levels. I've got to say this, and it is exactly what I said, some years ago. And I note that in the context of the report, it talks about 2003. So it doesn't sound like a question. 13 years in the germination. So I would ask you, Mr Mayor, what kind of signal does this send in terms of how weak we are that we cannot enforce our own planning amendments and, in fact, encourage this sort of dishonesty in an approach to submit a build form application which then suddenly contravenes the permit which was then subsequently given
Councillor Cetus, a simple
and
question.
transforms into a residential apartment which we now have to approve retrospectively.
Question to the application.
So, where does that leave us in terms of our powers, I would ask Mr Mayor?
Mr Mayor, this has a long the owner in changing the zoning from its previous industrial zone to mixed use?
Mr Mayor, I have a supplementary question. It's a pity that Mr Rollis is not here, because I distinctly recall, and it's absent from the history of this report, that we actually took the owner to the magistrates' court, and we won. So I'd like to know, what did that mean in practice? Because it seems like, in terms of what we have before us, a very Pyrrhic victory, and God knows how much we spent on that Pyrrhic victory.
I don't think it's relevant, but the honourable...
Well, it is relevant, because I can tell you why. Because why did we bother, seeking that course of action if, for instance, we were going to arrive some 13 years later at this juncture?
Mr Mayor, question through you to the officers. What are the consequences if council doesn't deal with this tonight?
Darren? It's a good question.
Mr Mayor, it's actually, the options are to defer the application. It's obviously open to the planning committee, and you can refuse the request. There are appeal rights. The assessment before you is that even though there's some unusual aspects to the form of construction, they're problematic to a change of use. It's relatively straightforward matter that we have to decide, because as Councillor Sears was probably alluding to, these look-like dwellings. They were proposed in offices. We have decided that they were to be permitted in offices, and it was a matter for council to enforce if they believed to be otherwise, which did occur last time.
Okay. Councillor Lee first.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just hearing that advice from Mr Rudd, if I'm reading correctly, we don't need to, if we were to, for argument's sake, refuse this particular application, I think the essence is that we're forming a view not to support the changing of the zoning and therefore the use, rather than having to give technical grounds for refusal. I just want to clarify that through you, Mr Mayor.
That's correct, mate. I mean, what's being implied here is that we're punishing some of the past actions. Our obligations as a responsible planning authority make a decision on the merits of the application. And that means we have little choice but to put those misgivings we have about the past aside and consider the application before the assessment is against the current zone. And the current zone says this is an appropriate and encouraged use for the law.
Thank you for that. Councillor McCarthy.
Look, I'm not one to hold a grudge, but I am one to see a loophole and a loophole that would be exploited. I just would want to ask the question through you, Mr Chair, to our officers. It strikes me that if you wait long enough, you will eventually get what you want, and this is an example of that. Are we aware of any other examples in either Darebin or Melbourne where a similar case has played out in this way?
I don't think...
There are plenty, Mr Mayor. The typical one is in industrial premises used for a caretaker dwelling.
Yep.
I think we're aware of that one.
We've had that very issue come to
Yep.
this chamber previously.
This is the only way in Darwin.
It's a difficult one for council and for residents around them affected by this.
Okay.
And can I also ask the current occupation of the dwellings at the moment, or the dwellings at the moment? Can we get an indication as to what's actually happening inside them? Are they sitting vacant? Are they being used as dwellings illegally? Are they being used as offices?
Darren.
It's difficult to answer.
Yeah.
There have been periodic inspections. There's from time to time. It's not appropriate for me to hold.
Yeah, it's an awkward one. It's an awkward one.
I would like to propose then that Planning Committee does not support the application as presented.
Grounds?
As simple as Councillor Lee stated, does not
Form
support
an opinion.
Form an opinion does not support it. I think if that's correct, I understand we can form that view. If I'm correct?
Darren?
No?
Mr Mayor, I'd be encouraging the committee to come off grounds because on the basis, if we're leading down the path of we're making this decision, the assumption that tribunal could reasonably make that we're doing that to punish the applicant. I would caution the committee and council about doing that because we're then, regardless of what we think of the proposal or the applicant for that matter, we're in a territory where we're risking an adverse
think that's important to know too, councillors.
On that basis, I'll move that we defer the matter to allow further consideration by the Planning Committee.
Councillor McCarthy has requested deferral of the matter. Do we have a seconder?
I'll second it reluctantly.
Seconded by Councillor Sweeters. Do you wish to speak to the deferral?
I think that we, based on Mr Rudd's last answer, I think we need to get a bit more information about how we proceed on this basis. I'm not willing to move a motion to support it, but I think we need to...
Next planning committee meeting, maybe?
Well, I'll just say we'll defer the matter for the moment. I don't want to put a date on it. So it's up to our officers to bring it back when they consider it's appropriate.
And as seconder, Mr Mayor, I'd like to highlight at what point does this responsible authority have the capacity to stand its ground, and when it says that it has a designated planning area, that an application will be submitted and executed according to that planning area, whatever the zone is. We are sending a terrible message to every cowboy that's out there who thinks we are weak, that they can build whatever they bloody well like and then seek a retrospective approval, which is exactly what's before this committee. And I would caution against us taking a soft touch in relation to this. These people may think they've gotten away with murder because...
We've been very careful with the language, please, Councillor.
I don't think I'm straying anywhere near remotely being in trouble, I can assure you, Mr Mayor. The reality, what we have here, to coin a phrase, is the realities on the ground. Now that's used in a different context, but it appears to me quite appropriate in this context that we must bow to the realities on the ground. This building has been built. This building has been built in contravention to the permit in which it was given, and is currently being used in contravention in terms of the permit in which it was given. So I'm not very happy. This is clearly a circumstance in which the balance is very much tilted in terms of the weight of one's wallet. And that sticks in my craw, I can tell you. Because I can tell you now, no other person out there who's putting an application before this committee would receive such preferential treatment. And I ask any one of you, in terms of the passage of time and the applications that we've dealt with, where we've given this kind of application, this kind of treatment. 30 seconds. I think it basically stinks as a matter of principle. I'm happy to receive a report, but I can tell you now, the report to come back is not on the merits of what we do with this, it is where we draw the line as a responsible authority.
Thank you, Councillor Setis. The request is to defer the matter.
To receive further information from officers regarding our Planning Committee's options to deal with this application.
Options, costs and so forth, okay. Deferral by Councillor McCarthy, second by Councillor Setis. All those in favour? Those against? Okay, Council has decided to defer this item until subsequent information is provided to us for it to come back for consideration. So we haven't made a decision that night. So if you hear about that item, we haven't made a decision yet. Thank you, councillors. That's a deferral. Next item of consideration is 5.5, application for planning permit number 55, Barry Street, Reservoir. Over to you, Darren. Or Julie.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Application has been received for 55 Barry Street, Reservoir. The proposal is for 3 dwellings, two bedroom dwellings and 1 single. One 3-bedroom dwelling and 2 2-bedroom dwellings. There are 2 car spaces for the 3-bedroom dwelling and 1 car space each for the 2-bedroom dwelling. Ground level quiet open space is provided and it ranges from about 40 square metres to 108 square metres. Notice was given, a sign on site and notice to the adjoining owners and occupiers, and 15 objections were received. These are summarised on page 100 to 101 and then responded to from page 101 to 102. The proposal generally complies with the Res Code. Minor alterations are required to the depth and secure private open space for dwelling 3 and additional detail in respect to screening to ensure overlooking complies with the Res Code standards. The proposal generally complies with the Res Code and the officer's recommendation therefore is to issue a notice of decision for the planning permit.
Thank you, Julie. Darren, do you have any speakers for this item?
Mr Mayor, there's Paul Connolly, is the applicant, and there are no objectors.
Thank you. Paul, are you here? If you can take the front chair, please, Paul. I do note for councillors there's 15 objections, 1 from the local area, 14 from Thornbury, Preston Reservoir and Baldwin North. Thank you. You have 5 minutes, Paul, when you're ready.
Good evening, councillors.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the permanent applicants. I would like to point out the following positive attributes of the proposal. The development contributes positively to dwelling diversity by offering single and double-storey dwellings and 2 and 3 bedroom dwellings. This site is 746 square metres in size and can comfortably accommodate 3 dwellings. Only 1 driveway is proposed. Hard surfaces at the site frontage are minimal. There are no garages or carports in the facade, and all vehicles can exit the site in a forward direction. The development incorporates traditional materials, including face brick and timber cladding, and adopts tiled tip roof forms, facilitating an appropriate level of integration with the surrounding neighbourhood character, and low front fencing is proposed, which allows an open presentation to the street. There's a generous 8-metre front setback, which complies with Res Code and allows a large front garden, which will include a canopy tree. The front dwelling has a recessed upper level, and proposed condition 1I will require the front porch to be extended to the west across the width of the dwelling to pronounce the ground level form and create a more diminished presentation of the upper level. There is a low 42% site coverage and a high 33% permeable areas coverage, which facilitates adequate space for landscaping in the front setback, rear courtyards and adjacent to the driveway. Dwelling 2, if you look at dwelling 2, you will note on page 105 of the planning committee report that the proposed 4.6 and 4.1 metres setbacks of the first floor level to the side boundaries are significantly greater than those suggested by standard B17 with Res Code. On one side, on the eastern side, the development is buffered by the driveway. The dwelling 2 is buffered by the driveway, and on the western side, there are no views to this dwelling given the adjacent large veranda on the adjoining property. At the rear of the site, there is a single-storey form, which is a sensitive design response to the adjacent backyard realm to the east and west. And we know that there's a drainage reserve to the south, therefore there's no residential interface to the south. The closest property to the south is a reasonable distance away from the subject site. Overlooking is addressed by screening measures and additional screening measures in permit conditions 1D, E and F. It's important to note that the adjoining landowners to the east and west have not objected to the application. The development complies with clause 5206 of car parking, and there are no issues from council's traffic engineer having read the council planning committee report. There don't seem to be any issues in the assessment from the council planning officers. So we would respectfully request that a notice of decision to grant a planning permit be issued in accordance with the conditions contained within the committee report.
That's it, Mr. Conley. Thank you. Thank you. You can resume your seat in the gallery. Questions from councillors. Councillor Walsh.
If there are no questions, I'd be happy to move this through.
Happy to second it.
No questions. Councillor Walsh has moved. Councillor Lawrence has seconded. Councillor Walsh, do you wish to speak to it?
No, I'm not going to Mr. Mayor, other than say it's compliant and the people who live in the, by and large, people who live in the rights were affected by, who live in the surrounding areas for this have not objected. So in that way, I'm just happy to waive it through.
Councillor Lawrence.
Just briefly, Mr Mayor, just to note that it's very rare we get applications with 42 site coverage in this area, and sadly single dwellings, multi-units used to be the common pattern. Now they're very rare, and we haven't always been able to even enforce that through VCAT or through mediation, so it is good to see a single dwelling incorporated into this as well.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Any further
Single
speakers?
stories.
If there's no further speakers or comments, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? Those against? That item is carried. Members of the gallery, council decided to issue a notice of decision, technically a permit for that application. All objectors will be notified by mail of council's decision, and if objectors wish to go to VCAT, they'll have 21 days of appeal to go to VCAT. The applicants will also be notified of council's decision. Thank you very much. Next item of consideration is 5.6, 10 Dennis Street Reservoir. Julie, yours? Over to you.
Can I just interrupt? I have no conflicts and
Thanks,
I apologise
Councillor
for being
Williams, for
late.
joining us. You have no conflicts. We can note that now. Thank you.
Application has been made at 10 Dennis Street Reservoir. The proposal is for 3 dwellings, 2 3-bedroom dwellings and 1 2-bedroom dwelling. The 3 bedrooms have 2 car parking spaces each and the 1-bedder has 1 car. Ground level secluded private open spaces provided for each of the dwellings that range between nearly 40 square metres to 109 square metres. Notice was given of this proposal with a sign on site and to adjoining owners and occupiers. 15 objections were received and are summarised on pages 118, sorry, on page 118, and then responded to on pages 119 to 121. Again, the proposal generally complies with Res Code. Minor alterations are required to the area of the secluded private open space for dwelling 2, and additional details in respect to screening are required. This will ensure the development complies with Res Code standards. The proposal generally complies with Res Code, and therefore the officer's recommendation is to issue a notice of decision to grant a planning permit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie. Do you have any speakers for this one?
Yes, Mr Mayor, Judy O'Meara is an objector to the application.
Judy, are you here this evening? Judy? Judy? No, looks like no Judy. Okay, if there's no speakers, we go straight to councillors for questions. Any questions, councillors? No, sure.
If there are no questions, I'm prepared to move.
Councillor Lee has moved the recommendation as is. Do we have a seconder?
Happy to second.
Councillor Williams. Councillor Lee, you wish to speak?
Just very briefly, Mr Mayor, it's a good application that complies with the standards that we set in our planning scheme. It does offer a very conventional layout and provides the housing diversity in that area. And I don't have anything else to say as the application is compliant with Clause 55 of our planning scheme.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Williams, anything to add?
Nothing further to add, Mr Mayor.
If there's no further debate or discussion, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That's carried. Members of the gallery, council decided to issue a notice of decision for that item, technically a permit. Objectors will have 21 days of notification of council decision to go to VCAT should they choose to do so. Applicant will also be notified of council's notice of decision. Next item of consideration is 5.7, 15 Esteemed Street in Reservoir. Julie?
Thank you, Mr Chair. Application has been made at 15 Esteemed Street Reservoir. The proposal is for 3 dwellings, 2 3-bedroom dwellings and 1 2-bedroom dwelling. Cars are provided, 2 cars are provided for the 3-bedroom dwellings and 1 car for the 2-bedroom. Ground level open spaces provided at ranges between 40 square metres to 130 square metres. Notice was given, sign on site and notices to adjoining occupiers and owners. 14 objections were received and summarised on page 138 of the report and then responded to on pages 138 to 139. The proposal generally complies with Res Code. Minor details again to ensure fencing, screening and the minor alterations for crossover requires conditions to ensure the proposal complies with Res Code standards. As the proposal generally complies with Res Code, the officer's recommendation is therefore to issue a notice of decision to grant the permit.
Thank you, Julie. Do we have any speakers for this item? Darren?
No, Mr Mayor.
No speakers, either as applicants or objectors. Questions from councillors? Are there any
If there's
questions?
no questions, I'll put that to you.
No questions. Councillor Greco has moved. Second, Councillor Walsh. Councillor Greco?
I'll just make one little comment. It's just comforting to see that the two of the three dwellings are three-bedroom dwellings, which is a welcome change.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Walsh, anything further to add?
I think Councillor Greco's point is quite apt, so I'm going to just, in the interest of time, just moving on.
Thank you. If there's no further debate or comments from councillors, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That item is carried. Members of the gallery, council has decided to issue a notice of decision on that matter. Objectors will be notified of council's decision. Technically a permit, a notice of decision, that's what it is. And all objectors will have 21 days of appeal rights to go to VCAT should they choose to do so. The applicant will also notify of council decision, a notice of decision. Okay? That concludes that matter. Next one is 5.8, 122 Tyler Street, Preston. Darren?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This application seeks approval to construct 4 double-storey dwellings comprised of 3 two-bedroom dwellings and a single 3-bedroom dwelling. Each of the 2-bedroom dwellings will be provided with a single car space and 3-bedroom dwelling, 2 car spaces. These will all be provided in the subfloor placement. Open space for the 4 dwellings is proposed 2 ways, and 2 dwellings are provided on the ground floor for conventional open space, and there are 2 upper floor dwellings that are provided with a balcony. The subject site and what's of interest of this is it's located close to the Northland Shopping Centre, and it's surrounded by on 2 sides the residential growth zone, which recently came out as part of the amendment to C147. The site is zoned General Residential Zone 2, it's on the corner side, it's 517 square metres. The application has been advertised, there have been 14 objections received. These grounds of objection and the officer's response to detail on pages 172 to 162 of the officer's report. The application before you is recommended for support. It's got a high level of compliance. There aren't really a lot of conditions to be described in the officer's report.
Thank you very much for that, Darren. Do you have any speakers for this matter?
There are no speakers listed for this item, Mr Mayor.
There's councillors for questions then. Any questions?
I just have a question, Mr Chair, through you. I just want to get an understanding in relation to the driveways and how close they are to the intersection there, because it is a very busy intersection.
Included in the officer's report, one of the things that we need to do is to provide detail on not only the car park design but the layout. That includes access ways. So that assessment has been undertaken, and it's considered to, and our own staff do the transport traffic regulations. They're aware of that. That location is actually an existing crossover, so even if there was a slight level of non-compliance, it's not a matter that council can then require corrective action. But in its location, it's generally supported, and that's detailed in the assessment on car park design.
Thanks, Darren. Any further questions from councillors?
No, happy to move the recommendation.
If there's no further question, Councillor Williams has moved. Councillor Lawrence has seconded. Councillor Williams, you have the floor.
Nothing further to add. It's an unusual site where there seems to be had a lot of previous issues regarding that particular site. So it'd be nice to actually see something new there that I think would change.
Councillor Lawrence?
Nothing. It's appropriate given the location.
Okay, if there's no further debate on the matter, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Members of the gallery, council decided to issue a notice of decision on that, technically a permit to the applicant. All objectors will be notified of council's decision, and they will have 21 days of appeal should they choose to go to VCAT. Next item of consideration is 5.9, 154 High Street, Northcote. Darren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This application seeks approval for a 5-storey mixed-use development. There's also, in addition to the 5 stories, there is a rooftop terrace garden. single bedrooms and 8 two-bedrooms. There are also 3 three-bedroom dwellings. The car parking is provided in a basement form that is accessible from Class Street with provision for the spaces in a stacker format. As set out in the officer's report, the subject land is located in a precinct that suggests the preferred height for stories. And the subject land is located in the commercial 1 zone. Site's pretty prominent. It's located on the corner of Clark Street, and it's quite close, as the officer's report detailed, to the Telstra Exchange. So it would screen out what is arguably not the best architecture in Norfolk when it's built. The application has been advertised. There have been 20 objections received. The grounds for objection are listed and responded to on pages 174 to 177 of the officer's report. The assessment of this application is that the application is recommended for support. As explained in the officer's report, the site context and the attributes of slope buildings located nearby add weight to supporting this application. The proposal before you is well designed, and this location is appropriate for this form of development in the context. I think there's a really good summary in the officer's report that details these height and context considerations.
Thank you, Darren. Now, do we have any speakers?
There's just the applicant registered speakers, Mr. Bruce.
Bruce, are you here? You can take the front chair at the table, please, Mr. King. Thanks very much. You've got 5 minutes to present your case.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, councillors and officers. Probably just in starting, I want to first point out that this is a second application for the site. Our applicants did make an original application for a development that was 1 story higher, and was in response to concerns raised by council. And after the matter being refused, was determined to reconsider their position and reapply rather than to go into appeal. So I suppose that's a good thing in terms of not running off the deep end. Certainly we wanted to work with council to get an appropriate result that hopefully will be supported by the council. I think in terms of the objectives for this area, it's strongly consistent with those objectives. It is in an activity centre location. It adjoins a building that, as has been mentioned by council officers, have not much architectural merit. We've matched the height of that building, so whilst it's 1 story higher than the third height, it's no higher than that adjoining building, and the upper level is recessed. Also, the architectural form, I'm not sure whether councillors have a colour copy, but certainly the perspectives show the detail of the elevation has a wave-like form to the facades, and I certainly believe that the architectural form is commend that, and certainly it is well articulated and has a lot of visual interest. Obviously, the ground floor does have commercial use, the upper levels residential. It's a well-located site, 2 stations. I understand that it's within 500 metres of 2 stations. It's outside a tram station as well. We submit that the building is a landmark building for this location. There's quite a lot of diversity in the units within the development. 2 one-bed units, 8 2 and 3 three-bedroom units. Obviously, they are small units anyway. There was a detailed assessment, traffic assessment made of the application, and supported the parking allocation. As I understand it, the council officers are happy with that as well. I think that's all.
Okay, thank you very much. Bruce, you can resume your seat in the gallery. We now go to questions from councillors. Are there any questions here from councillors? Councillor McCarthy.
Just conscious of the location of this development and the iconic nature of the site, and I just wanted to get some indication from officers, given that we've just had the I believe, one of the final stages of our ESD requirements being considered by the Minister. And I'd just like to know, in relation to a site like this, how that stacks up against our preferred ESD requirements, given that there's obviously a reduction in car parking, but also obviously the site is south-facing as well. So how does it figure in terms of environmental performance in that regard?
Mayor, at the bottom of page 180, there's just a brief commentary on the sustainability compliance. That doesn't include a comprehensive assessment of the recent GC commitment. It does highlight some areas which are largely constraints to the site, where ideally you have a different configuration. You might be thinking to refer to the Adelaide bedrooms, where there's a narrow funnel towards an external window. A site like this is unavoidable. We think there's some positive attributes that build community. The way the roof is being used is a positive attribute. There is some design qualities. There's certainly an effort made through the internal design. There was a marked improvement on the original application for review. It does allow natural light, internal light to penetrate the building despite its subtlety aspect. But in terms of its element, its design, its streetscape, it provides a good architecture to it. Otherwise, that's slightly pointless to me.
Thank you, Darren. Councillor Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question to our officers. I noticed that car stackers are planned to be used here. Are there any other sites nearby where car stackers either are being used or there is a permit for car stackers to be used?
Mr. Mayor, there's been numerous approvals now in the city of Darwin, and there's a well-known site. The first site in Darwin has some just found in the West Garden precinct, further down the hill, basically where the bridge finishes.
The Ruckers Hill Bridge, yeah. Yep. Councillor Seeders.
If there are no further questions, I'd like to move it.
Councillor Seeders has moved. Councillor Lee has seconded. Councillor Seeders.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, pretty much a similar referring to Hutton Street. I don't need to declare an amenity impact. I live a decent way away, but I'm in this particular plot and I know this corner very well, and how ugly and unsightly it has been for decades, and attacked relentlessly by graffiti, as the Telstra building has been. And I know a little bit extraneous to this application that the Telstra people are painting that building quite regularly in a vain attempt to try and ward these people off, but with little success. So how refreshing is that we've got an application which I'm quite excited about. If it looks anything as half as what's being presented in the colour drawings, it's going to look a fantastic development, quite frankly. And you can't fault its location. It has what you might call panoramic views, untrammelled. There'll be nothing built in front of it, Mr. Mayor, that will ever block its view. I would draw Councillor's attention to an earlier iteration of a very ugly pocket along that side of High Street, and specifically 136 High Street. For many years, it used to be, I think, a derelict old milk bar, which stood there for many years and was subsequently demolished. And we now have, I think it's a 3-storey apartment building there, which uses the right-of-way that people can see on the map just off Clark Street. Whilst people can fault its architectural design, it too cried out for much needed redevelopment. So we see that particular interface, specifically Clark Street and High Street, given its prominent location up on the hill, having that sort of view out to the city, is crying for that redevelopment. So I commend this, because I think to myself, if there was ever an unsightly pocket that needed some needed redevelopment, And we've seen, Mr Mayor, as you probably would have noticed in your own travels, if you're having to travel south of Clark Street towards Mary Station, how that portion of Clark Street towards High Street now is being radically transformed from what it was even up until about 5 years ago. So I think that if this gets the approval from this committee and is realised in the short term, what a radical transformation it will have for that particular aspect of High Street, Mr Mayor, and I'll leave my comments there.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lee, anything to add?
Just very quickly, I note that this is the second time the application has come before us, and I do wish to thank the applicant for having received the previous refusal, work with the officers to reduce the overall height of the building and reduction from 6 stories to 5 levels. I think that's a demonstration of good work on the applicant's part. Yeah. But also, as Councillor Seater said, it does seek to provide a refreshing outlook to the area, which is dominated by, let's face it, fairly ugly industrial scale buildings such as the Telstra building next door. And it does provide an iconic address in that it's right on top of Ruckers Hill, and it provides a level of comfort and amenity to the people that's going to be living in there. So on that basis, I'm prepared to accept.
Councillor McCarthy?
I'd like to propose just a slight amendment to the words in condition 5, and I would seek officers' comment as well in this, which is simply to, after where it says J materials, to replace the next sentence, which currently reads, "It is recommended that a built environment sustainability scorecard, BESS, or Green Star rating is included in the SMP." To replace those words to be, "It is required that either a built environment sustainability scorecard and or a Green Star rating is included in the SMP."
So replace the word recommended with required.
And I'll just seek whether if that's approved.
I think got the nod. Done. So we've amended that word. Councillor, do with that.
Yep. So it is required that a built environment sustainability scorecard and or Green Star rating. So that it's one or the other or both.
I think the mover and the second are happy with that.
I'm happy to speak in favour. And just in relation to that, thank you for the mover and seconder. I have a concern about this. Whilst I appreciate the points made about improving the visual amenity of that corner, and I think that is an enhancement to the general look and feel of the street. I do have a concern about applications like this which may have poor internal amenity in terms of their energy performance, and I think we need to be tread carefully when we approve things that may from the exterior look good and may improve the exterior experience. Someone is going to live in them, and we have a responsibility at the planning stage to condition for the best performance possible, and I think strengthening our place in that component is important. And I note that we don't have currently enacted our planning controls around environmental assessments of these apartments. That will come into place soon, and in future I would think that would be a lot stronger, but we don't have that power just yet to strengthen it even further. So,
Councillor Gretchen.
Just very quickly, Mr Chair, look, I'm supporting this application. Councillor said he's stole my thunder a little bit, because notwithstanding the interior design of it, I think that the exterior design, particularly the curved brickwork, really picks up on the single dwelling diagonally opposite.
Yes, it does.
So it's been very delicately designed from that perspective, so the developers ought to be commended on that. Also, that it's a 5-storey building, and the recesses, particularly at the point where the old Telstra building height was. So again, that's another point that's been made, and I really welcome that. So I think it's a worthy application, and will forever transform that particular corner block there.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. If there's no further debate or comment, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That item is carried. Members of the Gallery Council decided to issue a notice of decision on that matter. Technically a permit in place. All objectors will be notified of Council's decision at 21 days of appeal to VCAT should they choose to do so. The applicant obviously will be notified of Council's supporting and issuing a notice of decision on that matter. Next item of consideration is 5.10, 59 Normanby Avenue, Thornbury. Over to Julie.
Application has been lodged for 59 Normanby Avenue, Thornbury. The proposal is to construct 4 dwellings, 2 3-bedroom dwellings and 2 2-bedroom dwellings. 2-bedroom dwellings owners and occupiers. 14 objections have been received and summarised on page 195 of the officer's report, and then responded to on pages 195 through to 198. The proposal generally complies with dress code. Again, minor details are required to be altered in respect to screening to ensure that the proposal complies with the standards of dress code. As a result of it complying with dress code, the officer's recommendation is therefore consideration of a decision to grant a building permit. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Darren, with applicants representing here to speak, is that right?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, from here on we've got applicants listed. And in this case it's Chris McKenzie, the previously.
Thank you, Chris. You know the drill.
Yes, I do. Thank you again. This is another site just between High Street and St George's Road. St George's Road on the timeline and we're all here to move around with Liberty Avenue as a main road. And the fact that on this part of Normandy Avenue, flats and pianos are probably as common, maybe even more common than single dwellings in this area. And you plan on scheme is supporting the ongoing consolidation of sites like this. This site has a rear lane and a proposed 40 numbers, 2-storey. They all have the conventional design of living in a town with courtyards. So this is not one that's seeking to get sort of that additional insensibilities associated with rear living. You also have a combination of dwelling types, so you have 2 3-bedroom dwellings and 2 2-bedroom dwellings. You notice that one of our neighbours, looking at the plans or the areas, one of our neighbours is a single-storey flat type building, the other is a 2-storey flat type building with a big seat of concrete around. And the layout of the proposal has particularly paid attention to that, where the yards, which is really got at the rear, are against the single-storey building, and the 2-storey building is against sort of that concrete apron opposite the 2-storey flat building. So it's been a deliberate design response to look at which part is more sensitive, which part is less sensitive, and to lay out these forward that really responds to that, so that it will cause any impacts. We sort of see along the east side of the 1-storey building here, essentially 4 courtyards and a single-storey garage. So the design is very responsive between scheme and to the context of the rises and supporters. And I would say the location of the design and the design is absolutely nothing which should concern the
Thank you, Chris. Okay. Questions from councillors? Are there any questions from councillors on this matter? There are none, Mr. I'll move.
Happy to
Move
second.
Councillor Lee, second Councillor Sidis. Councillor Lee?
Yes, it's a very conventional design layout as the applicant has stated, having bedroom at the top and living spaces at the bottom. It's ideally located and it does have a degree of amenity offered to the internal residents, but also respectful of the natural character. So, and it does tick every box according to our development planning scheme, so there are no grounds for refusal in my book.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Sidis?
Yeah, just in relation to the themes that we've picked up, Mr Mayor, in relation to the other applications, it's instructive in this instance that the 4 are not supported by reverse living in any way, shape or form. And that's important because when you talk about how flexible is this site in terms of, I suppose, supporting the proposition of 4 units, I find it interesting that we've had shandies in the previous applications of between reverse living and then conventional configurations. In here, in this application, they're all of the conventional configuration. But what's also important, I think, to note in the available time that I've got, Mr Mayor, is that I note that in terms of the aerial photography, a lot of the previous iterations that have been exhibited in this area of dual and multiple occupancies have had to rely on a single carriageway, access and egress from Normanby Avenue. Now, I know that council was restricted in enforcing its preferred outcome, which is where a right-of-way exists parallel to a street, that we would like developments to have access and egress from the right-of-way, and we've had some famous losses, if I can put it that way, at VCAT who've rebuffed us in our objection to hanging tough on that equation. So it's interesting that the applicant in this instance has sought to do a combination. Support 3 on the basis of access and egress with respect to the right-of-way, which respects our preferred wish, but having regard, I suppose, to the functionality of the one facing Normanby Avenue, one access and egress point through supporting a new crossover from Normanby Avenue. But it's interesting that at 51 and 53, we've got 7 units, which are supported by one carriageway. So, all in all, it's not a bad design response.
10 seconds.
Having regard to, I suppose, the fact that it's not necessarily a unique proposal before us, given all the other multiple occupancies built over time.
Thank you, Councillor Seavis.
Yep.
Okay, if there's no further debate on that matter, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That item is carried. And members of the gallery, council decided to issue a notice of decision on that item. Technically, a permit has been given to the applicant. All objectors will be notified of council decision and will have 21 days of appeal to VCAT should they choose to exercise that option. Of course, the applicant will be notified of council decision as well. Next item we're considering is a 5.11 application for 21 Crawley Street Reservoir. Julie.
Application has been made to council for development of 21 Crawley Street Reservoir. The proposal provides 4 dwellings, 3 3-bedroom dwellings and 1 2-bedroom dwelling. The 3-bedroom dwellings have 2 car spaces each and the 2-bedroom, 1 car space each. Ground level private open space in this case is provided for dwellings 1, 3 and 4, with dwelling 2 providing reverse living arrangements with open space development in the room. The notice of proposal is, notice of the application was given, 2 signs on site, it's a form site, and goes to adjoining owners and occupiers. 14 objections were received, and these are summarised on page 211, and then responded to by the officer on page 212 to 213. The proposal generally complies with dress code. Minor details in respect to shading in some windows, shading of some windows is required for ensure the development complies with dress code. One of the things to note is the proposed development is very close to the region station, and therefore the proposal will comply with dress code. The planning officer has recommended that a notice of decision be granted to issue a planning permit.
Thank you, Julie. Do we have any speakers, Darren?
Mr Mayor, the applicant is registered to speak. That is Robert Forsyth.
Robert, are you here? Join us in the front seat there, please, Robert.
Crawley Street is located east of Spring Street. So the subject site is located right within the Crawley Street, which abuts the railway reserve. So we've got 2 dwellings facing Crawley Street and 2 dwellings facing the actual railway reserve. There's a little side street there for those. The subject site has typically 3 roads: Lane, Side Street and Crawley Street. The site is located to the south of Crawley Street, so there are some sort of restrictions in shadow cuts sometimes when you get the south-facing private open spaces. So what we did was enlarge those areas for dwellings 1, 3 and 4 and maximise natural light having those dwellings as currently designed. Dwelling 2 is the only reverse living, which is facing north and also opposite the railway reserve. We're trying to maximise daylight to that dwelling. That was the reason why we did a reverse living concept, to give them maximum daylight for that dwelling. Basically, I'm supporting the council's, the planning officer's recommendations, and please consider their approval of consent. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Robert. You can take your seat back in the gallery. Over to councillors. Are there any questions? No. Any questions? If not, we have a recommendation.
Happy to
Councillor
move.
Lee has moved, Councillor Williams has seconded. Councillor Lee?
Nothing really too much to add. I see the application seeks to maximise the street frontage and also access from the right of way which is made. It does have a good use of the space, and the location also justifies for the 2 out of the 4 that's the reverse living condition. So again, I'm prepared to accept that based on that.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Williams, anything further to add?
Nothing further to add. No.
If there's no further debate or discussion from councillors, I'll put that to a vote.
I just want to make one quick...
Councillor Greco.
I'm in favour of this application, but principally because it's next to a railway, in front of a railway line. And we previously heard another application earlier tonight, which was, I just point out, which was on just under 300 square metres, and with essentially 4 dwellings there.
Yep.
And here we're looking over nearly 750 square metres with 4 dwellings. So I'm happy to support this application.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. If there's no further comment, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That item is carried. Thank you, councillors. Members of the gallery, council decided to issue a notice of decision on that matter. Technically, a permit has been issued by council. All interested parties have notified of council decision. The objectors will have 21 days of appeal right. Should they choose to go to the VCAT, the applicant will also notify of council's decision. Thank you, members of the gallery, for that one. If you're willing to stay, you can do so. Otherwise, if you're finished, you can go. Next one for consideration is 5.12, 1214 Sheffield Street, Preston. Julie.
Application 311, 1214 Sheffield Street, Preston. The proposal provides for 9 dwellings, 9 3-bedroom dwellings each have 2 car spaces and ground level open space that ranges between 24 square metres to 90 square metres. Notice of the proposal is given. One sign on the site and notice to be joined those and occupiers. 12 objections have been received and they're summarised on page 223 and responded to on pages 223 to 225. To give you a little bit of an insight into this proposal, there's a quick summary of how the officers have processed this application. It was launched July 2015. A request for further information was sent in July and it highlighted a number of issues with the design of this proposal as well. Revised plans were received by the applicant and the officers returned a letter saying that there are still a number of concerns that remain outstanding. The applicant requested advertising to go ahead. That was completed. Once the advertising was completed, the applicant and council officers met again to further discuss design changes. The changes at that stage still weren't sufficient and the applicant was advised that it still would not be supported. And we refused. At that stage, the applicant then lodged a failure against council to an appeal to the tribunal, and that date's been set down. In summary, the proposed development does not satisfy Res Code, a number of Res Code requirements, and they're listed in the grounds of the notice of refusal. The officer's recommendation is that the opinion be formed to support the proposal and the alternate.
Thank you, Julie. We have speakers, Darren, for this item.
Mr. Mayor, the applicants have listed to speak. That's Judy Shetty and Virginia Jackson.
Ladies, if you can join the table at front here, please, and present your case. Virginia, yes?
That's right,
Yeah.
Virginia Jackson, and I'll speak.
5 minutes, Joe. Yep.
Thank you very much for your time this evening. This is a very large site. It's double the size of all the sites in this facility. It's also well located. Well located to public space, to public transport, and to the neighbouring activity centre. This proposal follows an earlier one for 12 dwellings on the land. This one's for 9. On the site of 1,746 square metres. It is a very large site. There are very little constraints on the site at all. It's got a large tennis court on it. There's no vegetation to speak of at all. This proposal has been really well designed. A quality architect was engaged to prepare the plans. There are no walls or boundaries. All the setbacks generously exceed Red Road code requirements. The setbacks from the southern boundary are 10 metres. Setbacks from the northern boundary are 3 metres, which are well in excess of what's actually required. permeable surfaces are twice what's required, and site coverage is only what's required. A professionally prepared landscaping plan by John Patrick Architects, or Woodwing Architects, was prepared for this application, which results, I might add, in a significant increase in the amount of planting that exists on the site already. That's an important consideration. There's very little, there's next to nothing on the site at the moment, and you'll see from the landscape plan that there is extensive new trees that are proposed to be planted. The detailed officers report goes through the objections. I might say that only a small number of the objections are from people that live in the immediate vicinity of the site. Most of the objections are from people that live at less than 1 kilometre away. Whilst these people are free to lodge an objection, it is a consideration to take into account the fact that these people are a metre away. Your officers have assessed the objections and in most part have actually dismissed most of the objections. It's not been sustained or a relevant kind of consideration. We would ask that you change the recommendation. You don't have any draft conditions before you, but if you were of a mind to change your recommendation, we would ask that you defer the application to enable further discussion and agreement as to possible draft conditions.
Thank you very much, that's it. Thank you. Questions from councillors? You can resume your seat in the gallery. Questions from councillors? Councillor McCarthy.
Just for a comment from our officers in regards to the request from the applicant about deferral, just a comment from their perspective.
Yeah, Darren, if you want to make a comment, I understand it's relisted to go to VCAT. So where are we now? Julie.
The applicant has lodged, an application has been lodged with VCAT against council's failure to make a decision. And the process through VCAT does allow for some of the negotiations through amended plans if they were to be submitted formally by the applicant through the VCAT process, that we could consider those. But at this stage, it feels been lodged against our failure and we need to make a decision.
Supplementary on that. Just an idea or two questions. How far out of time were we before the VCAT appeal was lodged? And secondly, is that attributed to the delay with the objections that have been received? I'm just wanting to understand what's been the trigger here for the delay, because it's unusual for something like this to end up with VCAT.
Mr Chair, as I mentioned previously in my submission to the committee, that there was an application lodged, council officer sent an RFI. So an application was lodged in July, RFI, request for further information was sent in July. Revised plans were submitted to us in September last year. The applicant was advised that we still had a number of concerns. There was a lot of negotiation going backwards and forwards. We still didn't support it, but they asked us to give notice of the proposal, so advertising process went through. We again went back to them and said there's still some issues, as you've been told the whole way through, that are still not likely to be approved, and then that's when they launched an appeal. So it is over the 60 days, but we have been going backwards and forwards to try and negotiate with a number of different occasions where the plans are submitted on a number of occasions.
Just as if I may, as a supplementary to that, there's really no option for us to defer this case, given that it has been appealed to VCAT. Is that the case?
An application's already gone through.
The planning being a full discretion, so you can form the consider that recommended by what the applicant asked you to do is that
Do we have a date listed for VCAT? Dates and mediation dates as well, or just a straight hearing date?
My understanding, Mr Chair, is that the appeal is set down for 16th of August this year.
So it's a hearing date, no mediation date before. Okay. Councillor McCarthy.
So I'm just from a procedural point of view, we have the equivalent of what would be a refusal here, which is, and so I suppose my concern here is that I'm not going to go against an officer's recommendation for refusal, never have. I am struck though that this has been found its way to VCAT, which of course incurs costs upon council. So I don't, unless I get some indication as to that there's any room to move here, which it clearly hasn't been, I'm inclined to move the recommendation and just, because I don't really see these.
Happy to
I think
second
the
it.
officers explained that, so that's where we're at with the form.
But sorry, I know Councillor Lee had a question, so I don't want to jump the gun there.
Just to, again, follow on the question about, I know there is no mandatory reconciliation meeting prior to the VCAT hearing, but I'll be keen to hear from officers in their opinion how far away in terms of their concerns regarding the application and any proposed, softening of the application in order to meet. So in other words, are we realistically likely to achieve any agreeable outcome if we were to defer? That's the question I'm seeking to answer.
Looking at the grounds of refusal and looking at the plans in front of us, there's a couple of significant changes that would need to be made. Looking at 9 dwellings that have, most of them have private open space areas of 25 square metres instead of 40.
Yes.
With no room around them to take that, to find an extra 15 square metres. So straight off, there's some significant changes that would be needed to be made there. There's issues around neighbourhood character, we have the front setback, so there would need to be some negotiation done with the front setback. The landscape, there's some poor opportunities for landscaping and development, need to be more work there. The front entries are a little restricted in their address to the, in terms, so there's a number of what I would say is
quite significant departures. Thank you. Yep.
Thank you. Happy to move. It hasn't been moved.
Happy to second.
Propose to move it. We've got to second it. Just don't need to
Councillor
speak.
McCarthy moved, Councillor Cedars second, Councillor Williams seconded.
I'd just like to speak.
Yep.
Is it possible?
Yeah, sure.
For the motion, just I note this, obviously there's discussion about process here, but I note just in terms of the streetscape, this application is way out of line with the surrounding character. I would also note within 125 metres of this site, this planning committee refused 6 units on 2 double blocks. So which I supported, but I think 9 is just a big ask, and it isn't a spot to entertain mediation till it comes through the proper process.
Yep.
Any further speakers?
Nope.
If not, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That's carried. Council has now determined to not issue, I beg your pardon, let me get this right. Not support planning application once it goes to VCAT, so we'll be arguing against it being supported. Thank you, Council. All parties have been notified of Council decision. Next item of consideration is 5.13, 501 to 503 Plenty Road up in Preston. Darren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This application says to build 6 stories of residential development, which includes 47 dwellings, ground floor commercial offer, including a convenience shop and a single practitioner medical centre. 47 dwellings include 36 that are 2 bedrooms, 11 that are single bedrooms. The development proposes 55 parking spaces to the basements. This is accessed by the year-round way, accessible by Union Street. There is a waiver of car parking store, which is detailed in the officer's report. As set out in the officer's report, land affected by amendment, this land is affected by amendment C137, which has been adopted by the council. The difficulty for officers was the The application has been advertised between 27 sections for the C. These are detailed. There's also a response provided on pages 244 through to 248. Now, despite that difficulty around what the rear setback should or ought to be, the officers have been on a similar VCAT assessment where that question has been put through what should be seriously entertained and what shouldn't be. I hope that explanation helps understand why that's been a fairly difficult sort of recommendation to put forward, given that we have an understanding amendment. So the application has been assessed elsewhere as having a high level of compliance and is recommended for support.
Thank you, Darren. We have speakers for this matter.
Yes, Mr Mayor, I have George McQueen, who was registered to speak.
Thank you, George. If you can take a seat at the front table, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr Rudd has explained most of the aspects of the design quite well. I just want to talk about the size of the site. It's over 1,000 square metres. It's quite a large site for the area. It's 2 site divisions for land of 1. A proposal to build a 6-storey building with 2 levels of basement. The front of the site is square. Penny Road itself is tapered, but the site is square and steps in line with Penny Road. The front of the site is quite straight up and down. The back of the site is tapered towards the residence at the back there. The site is very accessible. It's generally flat land. It's got a good tram service on Penny Road and with 2 tram stops, one at each end of the property. It's all walking distance. There's a lane back the back, and all the cars access the site from the rear, so pedestrians are comfortable in accessing the site from the front of the property. That client has gone for slightly larger apartments. There's 36 2-bedroom apartments and 10 1-bedroom apartments. Generally, the 2-bedroom apartments have 2 bathrooms and always an alcove for staying, so they're a little bit larger than normal. He's gone for 2 levels of basement rather than 1 level, say based on stacking. He's gone for no stacker approach. Got 55 cars in the basement for 46 apartments in the property. The site is, the design is centred around a central stair and lift. The stair is open, and we have a large ventilating skylight at the top of the building that provides some lights, natural light, and also a lot of ventilation allowing hot air to rise through the building. The biggest challenge for us was accommodating this large building in that environment, and the stepping of the building towards the back of the site, towards the house, the back of the most important part for us. We opted for the 45-degree angle. It's a very buildable angle, where we found at 30 degrees, it's very hard to build it. Most people want to build in straight lines. Sewage and gas and water want to travel in straight lines rather than 30-degree angles. And it's much more to build something like that 45 degrees. We took note though that there is an issue here about 30 versus 45. So I forgot about the second floor. We stepped the building in from both the northwest and the southwest boundary. So it's not a straight cross section that starts at 45 and keeps on going. It actually comes from both sides as well. So the building covers most of the site in the basement, close to 99%. It's about 85% building area on the ground floor, and it takes up about 45% to get to the 6th level.
Okay, well, thank you very much, George. If you can resume your seat in the gallery, I'll now fire questions off to the officers from councillors. Any questions from councillors?
If we could just get some detail about that setback at the rear that was mentioned.
Darren?
Yes, there's quite some commentary in the report. In the view section, probably close to 51 is where put that in terms of the context of the C 37.
So if I could just be a bit more specific, I suppose. It was a comment that the building had come in from a rear setback I just want to get contrast to that compared to the propositions in C137 about where building boundaries start.
Mr Mayor, the proposed position of council states a 30-degree setback, so at the third level, this application would be in non-compliance with the interpretation of 30 degree. So they're pretty well taking out a room and then up to 2 rooms once you get to the top or 6th level if we're looking at 30 degree setback requirement. So if you look at the second level, that's okay. Once you get to the third level, that's when you start to get an area if the 30 degree requirement.
Just to flesh that point out, so essentially where we stand is that we've adopted the position but yet has not received approval from the Minister at this point.
That's correct, Mr Mayor. C137 was lodged with the Minister earlier this year, and there's yet to be any advice on them.
So just a quick supplementary, if I can, just on that note, Mr Mayor. So essentially, in terms of its treatment currently before us, I gather then it'll have to be dealt on its merits according to our current arrangements.
Yes, Mr Mayor, as I said, where there's complete alignment in the adopted version of council with that exhibited and that considered by the panel, council can be reasonably more confident that they're happy to support that proposition. We have stated in our decision already where there has not been that alignment, direct doubts on what the Minister might do, and therefore they return to the substantive revision, in which case we go back to this is an area identified in the municipal strategic statement
Yes.
existing as a high change area where there is significant residential intensification forecast.
Yep.
Councillor Lee.
Yes, Mr Mayor, I have foreshadowed an alternate motion, so I'll just put it on notice for the chamber.
If there's no further questions,
Could we hear the motion?
it has been circulated.
It has been circulated, I'm happy to read it out
Yep,
again,
read it out.
assuming council has received it, so...
I never got it, but I'm happy.
It was at 4:21 today.
Yes, it was. 4:01 it was sent. So the alternate motion is as follows. The application be refused on the following grounds. One, the application is not consistent with the residential zoning of the land and the existing neighbourhood character of the area. Two, poor transition to the west elevation relating to the adjoining residential properties. Three, excessive site coverage of 99% is not justified. Four, does not comply with the 30-degree rear setback as per adopted council planning scheme amendment C137. Five, inadequate parking provisions in the proposed development. And six, the application is an overdevelopment of the site.
Seconder?
Happy to second that.
McCarthy. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I struggle with this application a fair bit because obviously with our adopted C137, it does allow for 6-storey developments all along the corridor of Plenty Road. However, if you look at actual zoning of it, and bearing in mind that there are actual differential zoning around it, I think the 6-storey need to be interpreted in terms of respecting the neighbourhood zoning of the area. There are immediately to the north and south of this proposed development site commercial zoning to be right for that 6-storey development. And in the context of the C137 planning scheme amendment, if you allow for gradual variances in height, it would present a much more uniform and interesting corridor along Plenty Road rather than this 6-storey wall of buildings all along the corridor as you travel from south up to the north. So I do find the inconsistency and due respect not being paid to the resident zoning somewhat disconcerting. The 30-degree setback has already been mentioned, and what I'm particularly concerned about is the effect that non-compliance from third story above to the western aspects of the proposed development on those residential properties. I think that's a gross overlooking and does present some overlooking into that particular properties to the west of the actual proposed development. The site coverage is 99%, and I struggle to understand because given the iconic site of the area, I would have thought some attempt will be made at landscaping to have some permeable surfaces, but 99% we might as well just concrete the whole lot, which, let's face it, this is what it's all about. There's a shortfall of parking provision. I'm not one to normally pick on this, however, this application seeks to have 17% waiver, 17 car parks spots waiver. The development associated with the cafe and the medical centre and visitors call for 72 parking spots. I can understand if there's, 10 parking spot waiver, but for 17 parking spot waiver, it's just an overreach. And on all of those, I think it does represent a gross overdevelopment of the site, and therefore I'm not prepared to accept that.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor McCarthy, a second. Anything to add?
I'll hold back my comments in case there's anyone else that wishes to speak for the moment.
Any other speakers for or against?
I'll speak against the alternate motion.
You may speak, Councillor.
Yes. Look, I'm not in a position where I feel I'd reject this application based on the fact that it does meet a number of key requirements in C137, and also because in relation to the rear setback and the front setback, there's actually a change to the footprint at the ground level in terms of allowing a different sort of dynamic space at the front and also coming off the boundary at the rear. So to me that mitigates some of the issue about the 30-degree setback. But I'm also aware that the C137 was a contentious issue, so the will of nearly half the council is for 4 stories only here. But that didn't pass. So, I think C137 is still a vexed issue about where it will end up. But notwithstanding that, I think, notwithstanding the setback in terms of the angle, the fact that they've come off the boundary on the laneway does mitigate it, which has been shown through that actually comprise and ranges along here at the rear and mitigate some of the impact on the rear residents. That's all, Mr.
Thank
Mayor.
you, Councillor Lawrence. Any further speakers? Councillor Seeders?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'd like to speak against the amendment. Similar lines, the issue substantively is, the amendment itself has yet to see an approval. So debating a semantic point in some respects between 45 and 30, I think is defeating the point. We either do one of two things in this circumstance in the absence of a formal approval. We either accept that the densification that we envisage in relation to Plenty Road over time will assume that level of form, that built form that's before us, or we don't. But let's go back to custom and practice. We know that in terms of the breadth of applications we've had before us in the past, that those that have been cited, particularly on a corner block, have always received preferential treatment, and for the obvious reasons, because the amenity impact that they would have, whether north or south, is mitigated by the fact that they've got the street carriageway. So to that extent, you ask yourself, between what we've already seen, already built on Plenty Road, is this dissimilar to what's been proposed here and now? Also having regard to its topography, is this towards the southern side of Plenty Road, or is this towards the northern side of Plenty Road? If you assume that the gradient rises as you're going further to Reservoir, then of course you might have an argument with respect to its height, particularly in relation to the fall that we've seen in other applications, as you would well know, Mr Mayor, in terms of southern-based properties of Plenty Road up there. In this instance, we don't have those challenges. So I think that's another consideration that would be viewed by VCAP, and that's why I don't think it can be supported, and that's why I'm not supporting the amendment.
Any further speakers? Councillor Webb, I just need you to send that alternative recommendation to the officers. I understand I don't have a copy for note-taking. Councillor Lee?
Sorry, I have...
The
I have
officer,
sent that through to the officers.
have the officer got it?
It was sent through at
It
4
was
o'clock.
sent through to our communicators and also Director of Planning.
I got it.
I'll send it now because the
Councillor
planning
McCarthy,
department's not
Look,
in
just
it.
as I'll take up my seconding rights, I just would make the point that I think we need to keep faith with the position that we've taken in relation to the appropriateness of certain types of development at this site. I won't comment on the height. I think that's a separate question. But the setback, the 30-degree line, I feel very strongly about. I think it was a signature feature of our considerations, not just for the corridor, but of course also for this site. And I think by giving assent to a 45-degree interface with the adjoining properties, I think is inherently problematic. The quality of the site, look, you know, I'm not going to talk too much about the dwelling diversity. I'm pleased to see there are some 2 beds. It would have been good to see more 3 beds. We want to see more family-style living in apartments along these corridors, and we're simply not seeing it. And I think that's evidenced by the fact that families are being pushed further and further out and can't find a place in these sorts of apartment buildings. So I'm disappointed that there isn't anything in that space in this application as well. But that's not a strong enough ground on its own, but I do support Councillor Lee's refusal on that basis.
Okay, any other speakers? If not, Councillor Lee, you can close the debate before I put it to a
Yes,
vote.
thank you, Mr. Mayor. As has been mentioned by other councillors, I think this is about what we envisage for along the corridor of Plenty Road. What this will set is a precedent that we're going to see a wall of 6-storey apartments right along the corridor of Plenty Road all the way up to Tyler Street. When we originally adopted C137, there was a variation to put a dot, it was adopted F4, but it was subsequently overturned and rescinded and reverted back to 6. I think the history of that has really shown that. So what we're looking at is essentially, do we want to have uniform 6-storey apartments right along the corridor, irrespective of zoning, irrespective of the transition to neighbourhood, and I'm prepared to say that we shouldn't do that, but others may disagree.
Okay, the debate is closed. I now put that to a vote for the alternative recommendation to refuse the application. All those in favour? Those against? That motion is lost.
I call for division.
Division is called by Councillor Lee. All those in favour of the alternative recommendation, please stand up. I name Councillor Lee, McCarthy, Greco. All those against, please stand up. I name Councillor Walsh, Lawrence, Fontana, Cedars and Williams. Do we have an alternative recommendation?
Well, Mr. Mayor, if I can, we go back to the original recommendation before us, and on the basis,
I know Councillor Cedars has moved the original recommendation. Have a seconder?
I'll second that.
Second, Councillor Lawrence.
I think the debate's been
Have
held.
this debate. If there's any other speakers, if not, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? Those against? Carried.
I call for a further division.
Councillor Lee's called for a division again. So all those in favour of the recommendation, please stand up. I name Councillor Williams, Cedars, Fontana, Lawrence and Walsh. All those against, please stand up. I name Councillor Lee, McCarthy and Greco. Thank you, councillors. Council decided to issue notice of decision on that matter. All parties will be notified of council decision. The objectors will be notified as well of council's notice of decision issuance, and they'll be given 21 days of appeal should they decide to go to VCAT. The applicant will also be notified of council's decision. Thank you very much. Next item of consideration is 5.14, plan application for 472 High Street, Preston. Are you okay, Councillor Williams?
What
How long to go?
Get some water.
Darren, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On this occasion, this application is a matter that's already before VCAT. Council has requested to inform of you. On this occasion, it is also recommended that the amended plans are not far enough. Obviously, the view is that they will be supported. The previous decision that refused the application was made on the delegation. As you've seen in the officer's report at the time, this report had been done quite quickly to approve a planning permit where there might be a height that's greater than that expressed in the planning scheme. In this case, the preferred height for Preston Central Incorporated Plan, the structure plan, is 4 stories. This application before you is for a 6-story mixed-use development. As the report sets out, that's not without precedent. There is already a 6-story occurring in this location or nearby. The application is 34 dwellings and 6 ground floor shops. There are a total of 40 parking spaces provided. These are in the corner and 2-level basement. There is a statement of grounds that has been received by the Common Objector. This is also detailed in the officer's report. The officer's report takes you through what has changed and how that has addressed the grounds for the refusal. It also takes you through the hearing of the key points, the issue of height and why the height variations are.
Thank you, Darren. Do we have any speakers?
Yes, we do. Dominic Skelly from West Cooper.
Dominic, if you can take the chair at the front there. Thank you. You have 5 minutes when you're ready.
Thanks, Mayor. Thank you, councillors. This application obviously has been changed and input from my urban design advisor and the planner and traffic engineer. That heading page their satisfaction has taken on board issues raised by the officers involved. In terms of the development, the councillors right in that there is similar development approved adjacent to the site. So on the southern side of the intersection for 470 a 6-story development approved, that's right up to the side. So that one there is at so that's 5 lots in that approved 466.
Yep.
And at 518 to 516 there's a 6-level building approved for that. The building presents as a 4-story street wall to High Street and to Wilcox Street. The amended plans now have 6 shops at ground level. We had a couple of apartments at the south-eastern corner that were there was some criticisms about in terms of their internal amenities and they've been removed. The building, as you move up the side, is deliberately stepped back from the dwellings to the east. That's joining 98 Wilcox Street. When you look up the building, you'll see that there's obviously a 3-metre wide walkway separating the site from that property, and then the setbacks increase at second floor level 3.2 metres plus the lanes at 6.2. The rest of it sets back 8.55 metres and again to the very top level 10.06 metres plus a 3-metre wide laneway. That's been deliberately done to regard to the risk of the 1710 plate. So if you point down a look at the plans, you'll see it on the applications and materials and finishing plan that that's been done to ensure that there's a reasonable setback. As a result of our property release, there's no unreasonable overshadowing, having regard to overshadowing, standing of risk, or there's no overlooking issue associated with the development. We take the view that that's the sensitive interface that had to be merged. There's no grounds from that property objecting to it, and so it's a good thing per se. But certainly otherwise, in terms of the community interest, the objector who was a party at the as a fellow, a person who's a 65 Youngman Street, that's the property to the north, and it's a site about 150 metres away from this site. The grounds at the farm, they said they'll make a submission for 5 minutes. They didn't set down the grounds of the R1 point. They had a written release to provide grounds, and is then applied to so we don't know what they're going to say. They're obviously physically removed from the site. Beyond those issues, obviously this is a policy setting is one where the site's in commercial 1 zone, so zero lot line commercial land is ground benchmarks of 4-level preferred maximum height, and that's discretionary. What's deliberately been done here in terms of modelling a 4-level building and setback the upper levels progressively behind it. So the design response is obviously important response to building design response to the site. So
Okay, thank you, Dominic. If you can resume your seat in the gallery. Over to councillors now to ask questions if there's any.
Just through the chair, just to understand your structure plan a bit better from the officers, this isn't something I think was adopted when I wasn't on council. These seem to keep coming up. 4 stories is the preferred height. Where does it go higher? Much further down towards the market in structure plan.
Darren?
Where does 6 stories and those sort of things come in?
It's more towards the southern end of High Street, towards Bell Street, where that's 6 and 7 stories. There's large points allowed in some communities. As you also go towards the railway line, Finch Avenue in particular, which is down towards the market, there's 10 stories that are supported in the Western Central Structure Plan in those locations. So the way the plans being worded, they are preferred maximums in there, but they're the way the Western Central Structure Plan is advertised, if there are departures above that height, public notice and third-party appeal rights are provided.
Any other questions from councillors? If not, we have a recommendation.
Happy to move.
Move Councillor Williams, second Councillor Seeders. Councillor Williams.
There's nothing further to add, and I apologise, I can't speak.
Councillor Seeders.
I think the theme here is pretty consistent with the previous application. And again, I would note the treatment of this in terms of the corner block. I think relative to its location, as was mentioned by the applicant's advocate, noting that 466 is in the process of being sold at this point of the plan. So when I had an opportunity, Mr. Mayor, to actually have a look at this area, the one thing that struck me, of course, was the fact that we've got an interface between what you might call a semi-industrial area, which is typified by Ralph de Silva. So its revitalisation on that side is pretty much crying out for it, and we're seeing that slowly occurring through the trickle of applications coming through. I note also in the available time that if I can just make this point, Mr. Mayor, it's interesting that when we look at the kind of themes that have been developed over time, we had the Preston Priority Development Zone actually came from the borders or the boundaries of Murray Road, Plenty Road, Bell Street and St George's Road. And there we've seen some applications which have tried to come in, as you know, towards that 10-storey height. And at Murray Road, there's a 12-storey building sitting there today. So further northwards, I said that the transformation will occur. It's not a one-size-fits-all where you'll get an opportunity with the flexibility that this block provides, perhaps, for this kind of height. So I think that needs to be borne in mind too, that within the streetscape there will be restrictions which will prevent this kind of scale. But those on the corner block have got that sort of preferential
15 seconds.
Opportunity in terms of having the flexibility of the floor or the layout to support such a proposition, and on that basis I think it's crying out for a development anyway, so I'm happy to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Peters. Councillor Lee.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll speak against the recommendation to support the revised plans. I think the plans, while they are revised, and there has been some attempt made at revising the original application, it does fall short, particularly given that we do have a nominated height of 4 stories, and this is a 6-storey development. And I've made this comment before in a similar application along High Street also, where the applicant seeks to exceed the nominated height by 50%, and we're talking about 50% overreach here. I want to see an exceptional application, and this does not meet the category of exceptional application in order to justify the 50% increase on the nominated height of that particular area. What do I mean by exceptional application? For instance, there needs to be better articulation towards the rear setback. I understand there is no mandatory setback around the area. However, An exceptional application would reduce that setback to allow for greater interface with the residential streets towards Wilcox Street. An exceptional application would also have better interface along Wilcox Street so as to blend in with the existing character, notwithstanding the High Street frontage. An exceptional application would also have perhaps an overrun or a penthouse at the 5th story rather than at the 6th story. So on all these grounds, these applications do not meet. And if we are wanting to have an exceptional application to come before us, which goes over and above the nominated preferred height, this is not what we're looking for.
Councillor Lee, any further speakers? Councillor Greco?
Chair, look, again, as with the previous application...
Against?
I'm not speaking against, as with the previous application. Look, you know, we have a policy and we have a structure plan. It states 4 stories, and here we're really going way above that. As Councillor Lee just said, you know, I was actually noting that it's it's a 50% addition to what is acceptable as part of our structure plan, and I don't see any particular exceptional case here to actually grant, you know, a permit on the basis of it being 2 stories above what we have stated in our structure plan. I think really we're really pushing the limits here, and I think really that we need to have a consistent message, and our message is what it is. It's our structure plan, that's our policy, and I think we should stick by that.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Any further speakers?
Just a question.
Lawrence?
Just, we heard comments regarding the other corner site. I wasn't clear. Is that been granted a 5-story or a 6-story permit? 466. Okay. Yeah, I'll speak against the motion. Look, I think I don't want to overstate matters. This is a preferred height in this area. It is the policy of council. It's quite an old structure plan. I anticipate in the future council will have to look at more intense development along this site in the future. But at this point we do have this policy. I think I'd feel comfortable about a 5-story variation to a 4-story preferred height on here, but 6 is just a bit too much of a reach at this point. And I think maybe we need to do some more strategic work here to really be able to support 6 in this area.
Okay. Councillors, I think we'll close the debate. Councillor Williams, anything else? No? All right. I'll put that to a vote to support the recommendation. All those in favour? Those against? I see 3 hands went up for the previous, 4 for the current. Councillor Walsh, you're abstaining?
I'm abstaining because I missed most of the debate, so I think it's proper that I abstain.
And that's counted as a negative, so it's actually counted as a no, so unfortunately you'll be recorded as abstaining, but that's still a no. So the motion is lost. Alternative recommendation. Councillor Lee.
Simply the council does not support the amended plans and advise the accordingly because we asked the formal review.
I'll second that.
Move Councillor Lee, second Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Lee, anything to say?
I think debate can be had.
Yep.
I'll just go through briefly. I think there is a justification for 5 stories instead of 4 here, and perhaps even 6. But some of the factors regarding setbacks and amenity setbacks need to be considered. And so if that kind of issue arises at the mediation, obviously then it'll be coming back here for another view.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. VCAT will make a decision, I think.
And the VCAT might
One way or the
decision.
other.
That's their job.
Yeah, mediation anyway. All right, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour?
Can we hear the motion again? Just because I think
Yeah.
there's a bit of extra discussion just there. Can we hear that motion again, please?
That the council forms a view not to support the amended application and advise VCAT accordingly.
Okay.
Second by Councillor Lawrence. Pretty clear? Okay.
Mr Mayor, sorry.
Yes.
We have authority to develop grounds because my concern is that we have any more grounds.
Yeah, we need grounds.
There could be an adverse
We don't want it hostile against us, so we need grounds.
Just a procedural question. When we do form a view on things, we never had to provide grounds in my past experience here. Is this something new that we're being...
Well, we've just been advised by the officer what we need to go to VCAT to defend our decision.
we do have to form grounds, so it's not guaranteed so where the company provided by the committee that could be done by utility. And for the sake of transparency, it would be best if the office to be provided by this committee using an alternative view.
All right, so we need some comment in relation to not complying with existing structure plan or something.
Just
Councillor
a question. When is this matter expected to be heard by VCAT?
Mr Mayor, I think now I have a big day. I think this was the 25th of May.
So if I'm correct, it's imperative that Council, Planning Committee is specific about its position at this meeting, not at a subsequent meeting. And if just to be clear, if we were to not adopt a motion at this stage, what would be the position that Planning Committee would take?
Baron, we're just going to ask a question in relation to if we don't take a position tonight, where are we? Where do we stand?
Look, we're there in it. We don't have another meeting until 2 days prior, and we're in dangerous territory of not providing sufficient notice to other parties. We know that it's already represented by a lawyer.
We need grounds. We need to provide the grounds tonight. So can we think about the grounds?
So just to be clear, okay.
Well, I suppose we can use the former grounds which are in the report.
Well, that's where I was going. I suppose is that you've actually gone through the process of assessment already.
Yeah. Yes. So Councillor Lee,
officers have not supported it until now.
Put an alternative motion, which is the council refuse the application on the grounds as follows: the height of the development is contrary to the adopted Preston Central Incorporated Plan.
Yep, sorry, Councillor Lee, continue.
Yep. The height of the development is contrary to the adopted Preston Central Incorporated Plan.
Okay. They're the grounds.
Yep.
Okay. So we already
Do you
voted on
want to
that.
take up anything on setbacks in there?
No.
No, it's all, well, that is within that.
We've already voted on it.
That encompasses the whole
The adopted Preston Central Incorporated Plan.
We've already voted on it, so they're the grounds we're going to VCAT on argument or refusal, not accepting it. Okay. Thank you, councillors. That concludes that item and concludes our reports for this evening. We now have
We haven't had a vote on.
We did the vote. They're just the grounds. We just read over the grounds.
Oh, sorry. Can we just call for a division on that, please, Mr. Mayor? I just wanted to, because I wasn't sure who voted for what.
I thought we did.
We haven't actually voted on the revised motion.
You changed the...
We haven't voted on the second motion.
We voted on that.
We voted on the motion.
We voted on the motion for originally to refuse and advise, but we didn't give them the condition, the grounds for refusal. Now we've been furnished with the...
That's right.
We've adopted the motion.
And then Councillor Lee went through the motion, and then Councillor McCarthy, before voting, said, can we hear the motion again? And that's when we had this further discussion of putting grounds to that motion.
Councillor Walsh abstained, so
that was on the substantive matter which Councillor Williams had moved. So that we have not voted on the alternative motion.
Just a point of order, Mr. Mayor. We have had a motion, the council has made a decision, and how are we actually now putting an amended motion?
So
it's been voted on.
Point of order. There's been no second. There's been no second position put because the the substantive matter. The substantive motion was moved by Councillor Williams and seconded by Councillor Cetus. It failed. Councillor Lee then put forward his motion alternative. Councillor Lawrence seconded.
And we voted on it.
Well, I would ask whether we actually did vote on it, because
we did.
So therefore, I'm saying we can...
I asked the motion. I recall the officer asking us for grounds on why we are refusing it.
I asked what the motion was.
Councillor McCarthy asked for,
We'll have to go back to the table.
before we vote on it, what is the motion? And then that opened up the conversation.
I don't think you declared whether the motion was carried, and I'm sure the minutes would note that.
All we have to do is just vote for it.
Let's just vote
not.
then. Okay, it's not going to change dramatically. I think we've already got the gist of the grounds.
Yeah, just didn't want to be you to
Well, I
abstain.
decided to abstain and walk out, so, okay, I'll now put that to a vote. Okay, those in favour of the alternative recommendation based on the grounds provided by Councillor Lee, seconded by, who was it again?
Councillor Lawrence.
All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Okay.
Yeah, we just call for a division now.
You want a division, Councillor Lee? All those in favour of the recommendation, please stand. I name Councillor Lee, Councillor McCarthy, Councillor Greco, Councillor Lawrence. Those against, Councillor Williams, Councillor Cetus and Councillor Fontana.
And Councillor Walsh wasn't
And Councillor Walsh is not here.
Mr Mayor, with your indulgence, I'd like to move 6.1.
And I'll second that.
Move Councillor Cetus, second Councillor Greco. All those in favour? That's carried. That concludes tonight's meeting. Thank you very much, members of gallery. Thank you very much tonight as well. The meeting is closed. Over. Somebody walks out.
Well,